Hello, welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasia Lavrina. President Ilham Aliyev's visit to Nakhchivan this week brought renewed attention to the strategic importance of this part of Azerbaijan. For many years, Nakhchivan's geographic separation from mainland Azerbaijan was seen mainly as a challenge. But today, the regional picture is changing. New transport links, the TRIPP route, energy projects, and growing connections between the South Caucasus, Turkey, and Central Asia could give Nakhchivan a much wider regional role. And this raises some important questions. Could Nakhchivan become a new connectivity hub between Europe and Asia? Can new transport routes also help strengthen peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia? And what could these changes mean for the wider balance of power in the South Caucasus? To discuss this, I'm joined now by Professor Rick Fawn from the University of St. Andrews in the United Kingdom. Professor Fawn, welcome to Inside Politics.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. So let's start with the bigger picture. From your perspective, from your understanding of the situation, why does Nakhchivan matter strategically today, not just for Azerbaijan, but for the wider South Caucasus?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a question of the region as a whole. As your opener said, this was a part of Azerbaijan that had limited connection to mainland Azerbaijan, but the significance today is really the reconstruction of the entire region. And one of the things that struck me from President Aliyev's visit was speaking about plans up to 2044. So where, let's call them Western governments, often think only in terms of, say, months, not years, this is an indicator, again, that this is a much larger set of thinking with very long-term implications. And I would be very much supportive of the idea of further integration within the region. I'm deeply impressed by how the C6 has developed, that is, both relations among the 5 Central Asian states, but also the engagement now for some time of Azerbaijan with them, and the prospect of really harnessing hydrocarbon capacity, green energy capacity from across the larger region, and the developing partnership with the EU. And to that, we might keep in mind, of course, that Commission President von der Leyen was in Baku about 6 weeks ago, and I think the comments made there were extremely important. Very, very supportive of Azerbaijan, its own efforts, but its importance to the European Union, and really the whole idea of building a much bigger, much wider connectivity that has real implications for a great number of countries.
Yeah, Professor, absolutely. It seems that C6 format, including the 5 countries of Central Asia together with Azerbaijan, are paying extreme importance for both European Union, European countries, and the United States of America. But coming back to recent visit of President Aliyev to Nakhchivan, security was a major theme of President Aliyev's visit. He highlighted Nakhchivan's defense capabilities while also speaking about peace and regional connectivity. So can stronger deterrence and deeper regional integration reinforce each other? And is Azerbaijan increasingly building a security model based on its own capabilities rather than external guarantees?
There's a number of very good questions in there. When we speak about deterrence, of course, the key question is deterring whom and for what reasons. And the idea of deterrence and regional integration together is an interesting idea. Of course, Azerbaijan operates in a very, very challenging neighborhood. In some ways, Azerbaijan's, and we've spoken about this before, Azerbaijan's overall geopolitical importance has really shot up on account of Russia, Ukraine, and of course, because of more recent developments in Iran and the Gulf region. So the potentiality is extremely great. Now, in terms of Nakhchivan, I would really hope that there aren't direct threats to it. I was certainly struck myself when Nakhchivan came under fire from Iran. Let's very much hope that that does not happen again. But I think in terms of the prospects of peace going west and east, so there's a question of Russia in the north, Iran in the south, but the west-east, including with Armenia, holds absolutely immense prospects now. And that will be very, very beneficial for Nakhchivan as well, because Nakhchivan will be integrated into this larger picture. And in terms of Azerbaijan's own capacities, I think for a country of that geographic and demographic size, Azerbaijan's capacities are very, very considerable. I think both in terms of materiel and importantly in terms of human resources, human skills, that's very, very strong. And I think anybody would be mistaken to underestimate Azerbaijan's capacities simply by looking at its relative size and numbers. And I also think important in this is actually using restraint at the right time. So when Azerbaijan was attacked, when Nakhchivan specifically was attacked, the Azerbaijani line was not to make any sort of immediate retaliation. That's not a sign of weakness. I think that's a sign of being very judicious, being very appropriate. So I think capacity is most certainly there.
Well, absolutely, Professor. The TRIPP or the Zangezur Corridor are also very important project, not only for Azerbaijan and Armenia, but specifically today when Donald Trump is backing these projects. Having indeed a strategic importance for Central Asia, South Caucasus, Turkey, Europe, and further. We all know that Zangezur Corridor was first proposed by President Aliyev immediately after the Second Karabakh War. And that point, mentioning the importance of opening Zangezur Corridor, was also in the trilateral statement signed by President Aliyev, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, and President of Russian Federation Vladimir Putin. The Washington summit last August in 2025 later brought direct US involvement through the TRIPP. How significant is that shift from an Azerbaijani regional initiative to a project with international and particularly American backing?
Well, potentially it's enormous. And I think the August agreement is very significant itself. I think the follow-ups are important as well. And that includes the 6-page US State Department outline that was made with Armenia as part of TRIPP, then the vice presidential visits to both countries shortly following that. So the potential is extremely important here. At least part of TRIPP looks like it rests very much on private initiative, that is of corporations. And that can bring with it additional political support. So once there's financial infrastructural development, even if, and especially if it's coming from the private sectors, it might be pulling government interest along with it. But all told, I think the potential of TRIPP is absolutely, absolutely enormously significant.
The section through Armenia is only around 42 kilometers long, and yet it has attracted considerable international attention. And now also most of the experts are saying that this project will help Armenia to develop its own economy, to make it more independent and being a part of the global and regional projects. So why does such a short stretch carry so much geopolitical weight, not only for regional countries, but far beyond?
Yes, that's a wonderful question, and it's fantastically phrased. I mean, in terms of any map, let alone a global map, this looks tiny, absolutely tiny. But that shouldn't dissuade us from understanding the importance. I mean, this really is the linchpin in a much larger picture. So Zangezur, southern Armenia, is absolutely essential to this much larger picture working. And I would really hope, I would like to see that there are benefits for Armenia from this engagement. And I often think of the 1990s when the political imagination was being built to give us what became the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. You know, this was a real piece of imagination made into reality. And of course, because of the conflict, because of the occupation of Azerbaijani territory, Armenia was left out of that. And it was left out of it for 3 decades. Now there is the prospect of a lot of win-win. And I think also the elaboration on the US's side, that document I was mentioning from the State Department, is talking about how we achieve the modalities, including from an Armenian perspective, to allow for the connectivity across Armenian territory and to make this work for everybody. So there are elements of the proverbial devil in the detail. You know, how specifically some of this will work is going to be essential. But the big picture idea of this relatively small piece of territory, the big picture side of it is incredibly considerable. And if we build the infrastructure, and again, this is a big picture, longer term project, it can have great significance for Central Asia, for Europe, quite apart from the South Caucasus.
Well,
And I have to
absolutely,
say,
Professor. You
engaging-
partially answered my next question, as TRIPP is often discussed as a connection between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, but it could form a part of a much larger route linking Central Asia and the Caspian with Turkey and Europe. Where would you place TRIPP on the wider Eurasian connectivity map, and could its significance ultimately extend well beyond the South Caucasus?
I think both it will, and I would like to see it do so. And I'll also say, I mean, in speaking to different people in different places with different interests, there is skepticism about TRIPP. You can sense that I don't agree with that, but I think it comes from a perspective that if this works, it's going to be on a very small scale. It's not a question of that. It's about the imagination that we give to this, and then the resources that follow.
Professor,
So
I'm sorry
the
for
big
interrupting, but we have to agree
Yes.
that TRIPP is not only about economy, it's also potentially
Yes.
about energy transportation from Azerbaijan through the territory of Armenia to Armenia, because already now Azerbaijan is sending
yes.
some fuels to Armenia. Then also TRIPP has a potential to be integrated into the middle corridor. And one of the key elements is that this project can help Armenia from the geopolitical perspective to diminish its dependence from Russia and any other country in the region, having more independent policy.
Well, I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, we can elaborate, but I mean, exactly that. And of course, Azerbaijan has been engaging in energy trade transfers with Armenia already. And in the EU meeting about 6 weeks ago, you know, there was discussion also about the electricity cable to Armenia. So there are multiple prongs to this. And again, I think the prospects for Armenia are potentially considerable. And I think there's a lot of confidence building that comes with this. This kind of genuine integration should, as we tend to call it, spill over into other parts of socioeconomic activity. So we start with some things, we see that they can work, it builds confidence, and it allows for more to happen. So I think this is important, both in terms of direct and immediate dynamics between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but it's also important in a much larger picture as well. And we would really hope that there'll be many spin-offs from the connectivity. It's not just the transit itself, but as Azerbaijan itself has spoken many times, you know, the idea of a regional hub where that there's value added to the materials that are being transported through the corridor.
Absolutely.
And again, that should be a benefit, hopefully, to everybody in the region. And I would hope in some ways that the tragedy that's befallen us with the Russia invasion of Ukraine, the situation with Iran, you know, it really does mean that we both need, but also have the prospects for even more positive activity, specifically in the South Caucasus. This is a real time to act on this, and for everybody's benefit.
Nakhchivan, its defense capabilities, but also what's important is that it's moving from energy self-sufficiency towards potentially becoming an electricity exporter with links to Turkey and Iran and possible future access towards Europe. How significant is that transformation, and could energy become another source of Nakhchivan's strategic importance? I guess energy topic is indeed very relevant now, specifically taking into account what we see today in the Middle East and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, again, I think the starting point is a yes to that. But what follows is that there's an overall move, especially on Azerbaijan's part, to develop also green energy, the renewable side, and to harness wind power, solar power. And we all know that Azerbaijan is the land of fire and wind. So we have hydrocarbons, and we also have immense green potential. the European Union is very encouraging of the development of the green side, the renewable side of this energy. So Nakhchivan could well be an added source of those renewables, and also, of course, delivering them through enhanced connectivity. So a double win, I think, there.
Well, Nakhchivan sits at the intersection of the interests of Turkey and Iran. Ankara stands to gain stronger connectivity towards the Caspian and Central Asia, while Tehran already has important transport and energy links with Nakhchivan. Can these interests coexist, or could competing connectivity projects become another source of regional rivalry?
That's a great pair of questions. I mean, on one level, when there are mutual interests that can be met, and we tend to think of that in liberal economic market terms, that we find something that is of mutual benefit to everybody, then the answer could well be yes. But unfortunately, obviously on the geopolitical side, the dynamics are very, very problematic now, and they're far worse as of February 28th of this year. I mean, on one hand, I would say that the Iran war does mean that there are even more prospects, as we've already said, more prospects for the South Caucasus. But on the other hand, yes, it makes for a far, far more distrusting, fractious set of relations within the region. But I think it still means that at least the east-west connectivity has to continue. I know well that both Armenia and Azerbaijan speak at times about developments north and south. And Iran is a major country. It can't be ignored in the neighborhood, much in the way that Russia is as well. But really, in the circumstances that we're in now, it is, I think, a focus on the east-west side. And in that way, I would agree with you. Turkey stands to gain a great deal, but it's also an essential partner in this, on the basis of geography, because infrastructure in the past has gone through Turkey. We'll expect more of it. Turkey is also a major supplier of construction activities and construction management, facility management, and so on. So in terms of the east-west side, I would see Turkey potentially continuing to work very, very well across the region. And I think it's a complicated road, but reconciliation or improved relations between Turkey and Armenia would be in the mutual interests of both. And I think, it's quite striking now. Turkish Airlines is flying into Yerevan. You have a situation where literally there are Turkish-marked planes sitting on the other side of Ararat Mountain.
Professor, and one more question, if I may. Indeed, what you are saying about it's like more broadly, wars, sanctions, and disruption to traditional trade and energy routes are changing the way governments think about connectivity in our today's reality. Are transport and energy corridors now becoming instruments of geopolitical power in their own right?
I think some would say that energy has always been fundamentally geopolitical, but I think it's even more so now. I mean, anyone who has the slightest interest in global affairs can see how dynamics have changed in the past few months. And even if, and this is extremely unlikely, but even if some workable path could be created both with Russia and with Iran, there would still be an absolute need to expand and build energy corridors on the east-west axis. So again, it's a yes to what you're asking, with a lot of complication, of course, to follow. But I mean, this really is a time for the absolute importance of energy security. And I would go again back to the comments made by Ursula von der Leyen in Azerbaijan about 6 weeks ago, about Azerbaijan being a dependable, reliable partner. It's very, very clear to major actors how important it is to have reliable partners, reliable sources of energy. So yes, the geopolitical implications of energy. This sounds like a truism, a platitude, but of course they're extremely important.
Right, Professor, thank you so much. Thank you for joining Inside Politics today.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Well, Nakhchivan's growing strategic role reflects a much broader transformation taking place across the South Caucasus. New transport links and projects such as TRIPP are not simply about moving goods from one point to another. They could reshape economic ties, regional cooperation, and ultimately the geopolitical importance of the region. The key question now is whether this new connectivity can also help strengthen lasting peace and turn the South Caucasus from a region historically shaped by divisions into an important bridge between Europe and Asia. Just a reminder, our guest today was Professor Rick Fawn from the University of St. Andrews in the United Kingdom. I'm Anastasia Lavrina. Thank you for watching Inside Politics, and I see you next time.